Welcome into the Hot Read podcast live here on Friday, October the 4th. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, writer and reporter here at Broadway Sports Media. You can follow me on X at JT_Ruhnke. And once again, I am joined on this Hot Read happy hour on a Friday here by none other than Stoney, Keeley, editor-in-chief of the So Bros Network, 1/3 of the Football and Other F Words podcast, and co-writer over at the Stacking the Inbox, where I am. I blanked right there real quick, but we're here at the bye week for the Tennessee Titans. It's a time where they come in 1-3 to this bye week and get a little bit of a chance to reset. I think when the schedule initially came out, a lot of us thought that this may be a detriment to this Titans team having to run the rest of the gauntlet here without, another bye later in the season. But when you look at it in hindsight, it may be a really good thing for this Titans team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of conflicted about it, JT, because on one hand, maybe it's good to give them an extra week to rest up, kind of get their feet beneath them. They got the win going into the bye, and now it's a whole new season. Everything they wanted to accomplish this year is still on the table right now, right? But on the other hand, I'm listening to Blaine and Zach this week, and Blaine's talking about momentum and how he hates the bye week because they finally got it going, right? They finally got some things going, and they don't get to really lean into that because they're off this week. So is that momentum still going to be there on the other side of the bye? I don't know. I think it's kind of hard to put too much stock into what they did against a pretty banged up Miami team that wasn't really playing that well when they were at full health anyway. So I don't know how much momentum they really had. I'm just excited that I don't have to watch this team lose on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's how a lot of Titans fans might feel, getting a little bit of a break from the gut-wrenching action, I guess you could call it, for them. But hey, with this, you still have some good football this weekend, and that's why you have to go on over to our wonderful sponsor, Sinkers Beverages, to get all of your beer, wine, and spirit needs. Thank you to Sinkers Beverages for sponsoring our show. If you know 440 Sports Network, you know Sinkers and their sister company, Bluegrass Beverages. More on them later. But, Stoney, I think with that, as Jacob Sane here in the comments says, that offense really has no momentum to lose. Especially if Mason Rudolph is the quarterback going into next week. Obviously, over on the Paul Kaharski podcast yesterday, which I produce and then also had to swoop in and pick up the fumble that is Paul Kaharski's Wi-Fi. Do it all. I'm a do it all guy there. But he brings up the fact that, or was learning on air yesterday, that Will Levis has a grade 2 AC joint sprain in that shoulder. In which his source told him that if the Titans were to play a game this week, he probably would not have gone. But if, the week after, he should be good to go. So it sounds like, from what the sources are saying, that Will Levis will be good to go for their game against the Indianapolis Colts. And maybe, just maybe, with the week off and sitting down behind Mason Rudolph, you can see a little bit of a spark into this Titans offense. It's what you would hope would happen. And I think that's the main case as to why I think Mason Rudolph specifically, as much of a game manager as he is and able to operate the offense, he really is just that, a game manager. You look back at what he did on Monday night, 9 of 17 passes for, I believe it was 86 yards on the day. That's what you're going to get from Mason Rudolph. He, as much as people want to say that how he carried that team last year to, a meaningless above 500 spot for the Pittsburgh Steelers, you're missing that pop that you get with a Will Levis and the ability to push and press the ball downfield outside of the numbers, something that Mason Rudolph has really never done in his career. And so I was talking to someone earlier today, he's a Titans fan here in town. His name's Tim Meadows, but he set me off this morning. I was on fire because he, like many other Titans fans, is of the belief that Mason Rudolph is someone that should play because this team, because he got the win, and he believes that he can still get the Titans to win more games. And I thought that, you know, I still think that is very silly, because I think where my mind has settled this week, and we talked about this yesterday on the Paul Karski podcast as well, I'm of the belief that this team is not good enough to compete for a playoff spot right now. You know, you have a lot of good pieces and a core in the making for 2025 and beyond, but the team this year just simply is not ready for that moment. And so Mason Rudolph can probably get you to 6-7 meaningless wins, and you know, you fall down the draft board there when you know you have some good offensive talent, some good defensive talent coming out of this draft this year. So you could get maybe that 8th to 14th pick in next year's draft and get to 6 or 7 wins with Mason Rudolph. Or you can ride the wild card that is Will Levis and see if you can start to tap into some of those great moments that we've seen Will Levis flash before. And so I think if this team ends up riding Will Levis and doing what this season was all about, which is finding out if he is the guy or not, I think it's pretty silly to try to trot out a Mason Rudolph there to win those games when you can get your answer and most likely get a better draft position next year with Will Levis.
Yeah, so I would like to make like a flow chart for everybody here. And at the top, it just said who should be the Titans quarterback, who should start at quarterback for the Tennessee Titans. Question 1, is Will Levis available? 2 options, yes and no. If yes, Will Levis. If no, Mason Rudolph. That's simple. I think there's another layer to this, JT. I think there is some overreaction to this Miami game, I think just a little bit, because we've heard, I can't recall off the top of my head. It's been a shitty week, full disclosure, and it is a miracle that I even have a thought in my head right now. I can't recall if it was Brian Callahan or Nick Holtz. One of the two at a press conference this week talked about how the game plan kind of changed a little bit when Will Levis came out of the game on Monday night. And so I think you're looking at 2 different offenses. And if you liked the offense that you got on Monday night, which I don't think is what Brian Callahan's full vision of the offense is. Now, they did some things that I liked. I liked the big explosive runs. The problem is that for every one of those, there were about 4 tackles for a loss, runs stopped in the backfield, that sort of thing. I don't think that offense works against week in and week out NFL opponents. I don't think it's going to work against the Colts, the Lions, the Bills, who are all coming up on this team's schedule. So while it might have looked like a spark on Monday night with Mason Rudolph, I don't think that's going to work against many other opponents in the NFL. The Miami Dolphins were pretty beat up. I think with Will Levis, you do still have 2 things going for you. You do still have the potential for the explosive, holy shit kind of plays that we saw last season off play action, the deep bombs to DeAndre Hopkins, to Nick Westbrook-Akine, those highlight plays that, you know, I don't know that Mason Rudolph is going to be hitting at a high rate. I think you have that, but then I also think you've got to know if he can get better. And if the objective with Will Levis this season was to see if he can get better, you haven't seen him get better just yet, but you still got to have that evaluation period to get your answer for sure. And I feel like that's what it's going to be about in their mind, is a higher ceiling and completing the evaluation on Will Levis, because you already know what Mason Rudolph is. We saw what Mason Rudolph was on Monday night. And yeah, maybe it's a higher floor. Maybe it's a more steady, stable offense, a better run game and that sort of thing. But the question I would ask the people that are saying that is, do you think that's going to be effective when it comes time to play the Indianapolis Colts, the Detroit Lions, and the Buffalo Bills? So I'm with you. I get it. People like this topic, but it was kind of over to me the moment Brian Callahan emphatically said after the game Monday night, Will's our starting quarterback if he's available.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And as Jack Ripper brings up in the comments here, he says, I think Levis is learning a new scheme and coach is still
Yeah.
learning Levis. Trust the process. I think that goes for a lot of this team. We talked to Tyler Boyd last week, who said, people are still trying to learn this offense. He's a little bit of ahead of the game because he's been around Brian Callahan, but it never was, trying to mesh all these pieces together immediately was never going to be the outcome. But I think John in the comments here brings up an interesting point as well, where he says, even though I agree with starting Levis and letting him develop, people still have to acknowledge there are 52 other players that are fighting for this team. And I think that was a point that was brought to my attention earlier today as well, about if Will Levis continues to not be the guy, and you're seeing all these mistakes and you're going nowhere with this team, do you think Brian Callahan ever has to pull the plug because he gets the sense he might be losing a locker room in his first year? I personally don't subscribe to that idea of thinking, but I mean, if this is a team where you bring in a lot of good talent and you bring in a young head coach whose message it continues to be, it continues to be that this team is growing together, but if they don't see success, do you think that's a possibility at all that this could become an issue for the locker room?
I don't personally see why not, because you're talking about human psychology, and I know that athletes are wired different than guys like you and me that are just sitting on our microphones, running our mouths twice a week about this team, what we think. And they probably think we sound like a bunch of idiots, and they probably think the Super Bowl's still on the table. I get the athlete's mindset. That's no big deal. But I think, like, in that situation, you could absolutely understand the perspective if you're somebody like, let's say, well, L'Jarius Sneed wasn't a free agent acquisition. They traded for him, but potentially Calvin Ridley, like, you come here because you're thinking it's going to be this thing and it's not this thing and it's not working, and maybe you don't see it. Does your play even subconsciously just kind of slip a little bit on the field because you're not getting the results, you're not getting the proof of concept and that sort of thing? I think it's just a natural human thing to be at that level. So I know, like, athletes are kind of hardwired. It's not over till it's over, but I think there's still a human side of this that I could absolutely understand if there were guys in the locker room that are just kind of thinking, this isn't clicking, it's not working. What are we doing here?
Yeah, I agree with you there, but I think I'm of the mindset, like you said, these athletes are wired differently, and they're always going to believe that they are still not out until it's the dust is settled and they're mathematically eliminated this year. Quick aside, because I'm for one am ready to be done with the quarterback controversy of this team. But before we keep going, have to give a special shout out to our sponsors, Sinkers Beverages and Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville. Sinkers Beverages over in East Nashville. If you haven't gotten yourself out there, you need to, because they have been serving that community for over 4 decades. I believe their 40th anniversary is this year. They are a 3-time Best of Nashville Liquor Store of the Year, as voted by you. Got to join their in crowd, because that's where you get their special allocations, events, and benefits when you join and sign up with them. I know they got some really, really nice events and allocations coming up as we get closer to the end of the year here. So you got to sign up for the in crowd on that one, and then follow them on Sinkers Bev over on Twitter, Instagram, and wherever you are on social media. And then if you can't get yourself out there, that's okay, because they are on Uber Eats. Simply search Sinkers Beverages and have the booze delivered to you, because remember, they drive so you can drink very responsibly, like I will be continuing to do as the New York Mets absolutely heartbreaker of a game. I had so many mixed emotions, and then Pete Alonso saves me, and I know I look like utter garbage today, but it's because I was watching the game over at a friend's house who has a cat, and I'm deathly allergic to cats, but they're so fluffy. I don't know. I can't help myself, but yeah, I woke up this morning and I was like, oh my God, I almost died. So
I'm having some cat trouble too. I'm trying to wrangle up these barn cats, get them all their shots, get them bath to the groomer and all that. I'm just like, back and forth, vet groomer. So it's going to be Gin Friday. Gin Friday is back on tonight.
Yeah, for sure. So you got to get over to Sinker's Beverages to get some of that gin on, because they have a wonderful gin selection. Thank you once again to Sinker's Beverages and their sister store, Bluegrass Beverages in Hendersonville, who they have been serving that community for over 50 years over there, 5 decades over there of business. So moving on to the Titans quarterly report card here. Obviously, it's not really, it's no longer a quarter of the season because they continue to add weeks on. So it makes this hard. But narrative wise, I feel like this is the quarter spot of the season. We talked about how things, after these first 4 games, it'd be really interesting to reevaluate this team. And I think we all agreed that it has not gone the way we thought it would have before the season here. But I think it's a good spot to kind of talk about the development, or, the lack of development for a lot of the areas on this team. Obviously, we're not going to spend a whole lot of a time on, quarterback play or anything like that, because as Kenneth says in the comments, his quarterly report is an F all across the board, because if this season is finding out about what Will Levis is, then I'm afraid we have our answer. Yeah, I mean, the story is not written on him yet, but it's looking like that quickly. I will say, there are baby steps of improvement. Will Levis has gone from throwing catastrophically bad interceptions to just merely bad interceptions. And I think that's progress any way you look at it.
I do too. And I don't think people would be as mad as the okay interceptions if not for the boneheaded interceptions. I think that makes people even more madder. So like, we're going through it like, oh, another week and another boneheaded Will Levis interception, but it's really not as bad as the other ones. So the interceptions, the turnovers are at least getting better.
Yeah, I agree with you there. Yeah, we are. We're
down bad. Let's be real. I can't believe we're just, the interceptions are getting better.
Hey, you got it. You got to find the angle wherever you are on him. And I think we're running out of maybe angles. We're going to have to invent some new ones. But I think there are some angles of this team in places where, it's not all doom and gloom. I think people would really enjoy to hear some positives about the Titans team. And unfortunately, we're not going to start with those because we have to talk about the offensive line here with the first quarterly report. We knew that this line was going to take some time to develop. I think that's plain and simple. You bring in a top first round pick in J.C. Latham, who has looked very good. Peter Skronsky, not as much, maybe not as what you would hope in your 11th overall pick from a year ago. Lloyd Cushenberry being, I believe, the 3rd highest paid center in the league, not living up to those expectations. And then you have Dylan Radins and the revolving door of NPF. So Stoney, I ask you, considering all the people they brought in, Bill Callahan as their offensive line coach and run game coordinator, how would you hand out a grade here, quarter of the way through the season?
I'm actually going to go with the C- for the offensive line. I think JC Latham is a superstar in the making. His games, it just seems like he's getting better and better each week. And he's doing some really nuanced stuff with his hands that looks like a guy that's already kind of established in this league. I think now it's a matter of ironing out the consistency and some of the communication among the offensive line, which is a big theme for all 5 of these guys. It's just like, they've got to gel. They've got to get on the same page at some point. Right now, it just feels like there's 4 guys doing their job, and there's one guy that's just catastrophically blowing it on every play. And once they build some consistency, I think they'll be pretty good. Peter Skronsky has been kind of spotty, which is not what you want to see, especially if you were a dumbass that came on this podcast and said he was going to be an all-pro this season. I don't know if that's going to happen, but he seems to be kind of acclimating to the new system, and the new system is kind of complicated compared to what the Titans were running last year. And you see the diagram of like Bill Callahan's run schemes all like drawn out on the board, and you're just like, this is like hieroglyphics. We're reading like drawings from cavemen on the walls of caves from prehistoric times. Don't know what any of it means, but there is to be expected an adjustment period. I think Lloyd Cushenberry has been, like you said, not really living up to the billing so far. Dylan Radins, I think, has been pretty solid. NPF, is enough to really bring the grade down quite a bit. I think with a little more chemistry and a little more consistency, I do think they are trending in the right direction, and I'm encouraged by the performances of JC Latham so far. I'm gonna give him a C minus here.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to you as well. I'd give him probably a C, just straight up. I think when you look at the line overall in these first 4 weeks, talk to me 2 weeks ago, I probably would have given it a D or something like that. But
Yeah,
we've seen the progress from them in 2 weeks here, and I think it's been fine. Like you said, I think MPF is still a problem, but all the other guys are continuing to start to click here. And I think that's the biggest thing for this offensive line. I think, like you said last week, with how complicated this Bill Callahan system is for these offensive linemen, when you see them really execute his magic, it clicks. And that's where you get
beautiful.
plays like the Tony Pollard 41-yard run, where
Hmm.
he's hitting the hole and everything executes as it needs to. But for the rest of the game, more so, you get what you get in that game, where you run the ball 40 times and barely get 3.6 yards a clip on
Yeah,
your rushes, and it's just not good enough, especially also in the pass protection. I think the Titans helped themselves out a little bit by having Mason Rudolph just be a statue back there and not panicking in the pocket like Will Levis tends to do. But I think it's been fine. But like you said, it would take some time for this defense to get it going and get it clicking. So I think I'm with you around there on the C range on that one. Now, moving on to a group that, I don't know, this might be a hot take, but I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are first on the wide receiver position for this team. Obviously, you bring in guys like Calvin Ridley for this team on a big payday, which early on in the season, he was like the 10th highest paid wide receiver. Now looking at it later into this season, you look at a guy like Tyler Boyd as well. Now, Calvin Ridley is like the 16th or 17th highest paid receiver now in the league, and for this team, he still is the highest paid. But you bring in those two big guys, you have DeAndre Hopkins coming back, and you have, I think you have a guy in Treylon Burks and NWI, who I think is kind of concerning. Maybe. What are your thoughts on the offensive or the wide receiver position here?
how are we counting Nick Westbrook-Akine in this conversation? Because he's technically a wide receiver, but they've only been using him to like run block and shit. So
Yeah,
should we have included him with the tight ends? I don't know.
maybe we should include him as an offensive lineman.
Maybe we should. Yeah,
I
maybe
think,
he should. Oh, you know what? Shit. We should have included Daniel Brunskill in our O-line evaluation,
yes,
because I think he's
we can go
probably
back real
been their
quick.
I
Yeah.
think he's probably been their second best offensive lineman this year so far as consistency goes. He's only just seeing a handful of snaps every game. No, but seriously, the wide receivers, man, I don't know, because I feel like the drops from Treylon Burks, Calvin Ridley's had a crucial, critical drop as well. I think those kind of bring the score down. But if you watch the tape, these guys are getting open. Like, the wide receivers are doing their jobs. Calvin Ridley, a versatile piece that's moving around the formation. They're using him in motion. They are handing the ball off to him, and he's running touchdowns. I think, that Treylon Burks is sealing blocks for, and you probably don't want your first round wide receiver being like, oh man, that's his defining trait, is he's a really good blocker. But it is executed well, and I think DeAndre Hopkins is easing back into DeAndre Hopkins level talent. I think Tyler Boyd has been good, been getting open. The ball just hasn't necessarily been getting to him. So, I think I would probably actually lean, man, I might actually lean B minus with these guys, because I do think there are moments that I watch the tape and I'm like, wow, that's great. These guys are separating. I think that's another interesting thing too, is you look at the next gen stats after each game, and they have several guys that are above average in separation, above NFL league average in separation. I think that's encouraging. How do you factor in the fact that the ball's not getting to them, so maybe they're not being as productive? I don't know. I tend to say, hey, it looks like these guys are, by and large, except for the drops, they're doing their jobs. And I think it's weighted down by the poor performances from Treylon Burks, but I think Calvin Ridley and Hopkins and Boyd have been pretty good.
Yeah, so that's interesting because that's not really where my head was at. I was honestly going to give this group right now a D and D plus.
Woohoo, okay.
Obviously, I think that you talk about how good they've been separating and how good they've been open, but as much as it is on the quarterback to get them the ball and for them to be open, I just think that this team continues to not do enough in that area. I've not been really impressed by anything that from this team outside of DeAndre Hopkins' resurgence here into the offense in week 3 and a little bit in week 4. It feels like a lot of what's worked for this team is designed plays that Brian Callahan has schemed up. And I think there's a lot of, there are some warning signs here. Like you said, the drops from Calvin Ridley and Treylon Burks, I think, are a problem. You look at a guy like Calvin Ridley, who through 4 games is averaging 2.25 receptions per game. I think, the downward trend here for Calvin Ridley, he hasn't been what I think this team needs him to be. And obviously it's a two-way street, right? I'm not discrediting that the quarterback play could be better for them to see more results. But when you bring your guy in like Calvin Ridley to get 2.25 receptions a game, you have a guy like Treylon Burks, like you said, who is still out snapping DeAndre Hopkins and being used as a blocker for the most part. And you have a guy like Tyler Boyd who, he fits into the system well, but doesn't really offer anything in terms of after the catch or explosive playmaking. I just think I still need to see more from this team in terms of the wide receiver position.
Fair enough. It's a good point, and that's why I kind of lean towards, like, how do you view like the quarterback's ability to get the ball to the guys and the production that we've seen specifically from Ridley and Hopkins in the past. It's not there. I think it's kind of, you factor in the injuries, I think it's kind of tough to grade them right now. And it sounds to me like you're probably grading them on what we've seen consistently through all 4 games. And I think I'm kind of grading them on what they could be and what their best moments have been.
Yeah, I think the potential is there, but I think consistency is key for this team. And until that consistency starts clicking and they start firing on all cylinders, it's been lackluster. And I think it's not, I certainly wouldn't give it a passing grade when you bring in all these pieces in this Brian Callahan offense, which I think we can move on to Brian Callahan himself in the play calling and what he has been as a head coach so far this season. Through 4 games, we've seen ugly looks for him, especially, having to navigate yelling at your quarterback for making boneheaded plays and continuing to stand by him and things like that. And also his play calling has been, for better for worse, I think it's been a mixed bag in terms of what they've been able to call. So, Stoney, what would you give Brian Callahan through his first 4 games as the play caller and head coach?
I'm going D here, and I'm going to be kind of hard on the guy because I have talked a lot about this scheme and watching the tape and seeing moments where you're like, that's it. Holy shit, we need more of that. Do that until they stop you, kind of deal. But I would be critical of his rhythm. I feel like there are instances when he kind of tries to force the issue a little bit and maybe doesn't lean into things that are working, doesn't flow well. We've seen a couple of rookie head coach mistakes. It's still something that he's trying to grow into on his own. I think the play design, the personnel usage, those sort of things have worked pretty well at times. And it's another instance of projecting with this team where you can see like, oh man, I see what he's going for there. And if they start hitting on that stuff, man, this offense is going to take a step forward, but we haven't seen it yet. And the issue is they keep getting in these situations, these like 3rd and longs, stuff like that, long yardage to pick up. And he's just kind of defaulting to throw the ball to make up, like now we got to throw the ball deep. And I don't know, man. I don't feel like there has been a good rhythm to the play calling. And there have been times where I've kind of wondered, like, is this just like he doesn't have his feet beneath him just yet either. We keep talking about the team needing to gel. Maybe he needs to kind of gel and grow into the position as well. It's a D right now, but I think there is potential for, I don't want it to sound like I'm out on Brian Callahan, because there have been people already saying like, oh, it's time to move on. Like he just doesn't have it and that sort of thing. And I think it's ridiculous, because I do think he's a sharp guy. I think the system, if we see it through, if we get to the full visions, get where we're going with this thing, I think it'll be pretty good. And as he gains more experience as a head coach, I think he could grow into a pretty good head coach. It's just not there right now through 4 games.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one. I would give it around maybe a C- to D plus. You know,
Yeah.
I'm with you that the biggest thing for me has been that play calling. Like when it's there on those 3 or 4 drives where he's in his bag and he is absolutely cooking, you know, that's been really, really good. But it hasn't been consistent. And that's something I think, you know, with him kind of learning to navigate that, I think we've seen it with learning to navigate his young quarterback who makes a lot of mistakes. And with that comes him maybe scaling back the offense a bit at times when, you know, when Will Levis makes a mistake and trying to get them back on track, but then not being able to up the tempo once again, once they scale him back and get Will Levis maybe a little bit more into a groove there. I think that's something I would like to see changed as well. You know, it's one thing to kind of scale it back and put the training wheels on, so to say, to get him back on track, but then they never take him off again in the game. And that's why we continue to see them be, you know, down in distance and these 3rd and longs and whatnot. And drives just go 3 and out because they're not putting together methodical drives, you know, throughout the game. And I think to your point, I do think that it's still a learning opportunity for Brian Callahan, as he is the head coach and also play caller for the first time in his career. And I think, you know, like he has a good staff around him. I think the personnel in that coaching room is there to help and support him. And I think that is something that I've been impressed with this team, especially, you know, as Jack Ripper asked an interesting question saying, is Callahan listening to his dad too much or not enough? How big of a factor is his father in the play calling? I'm not sure. That's something that I think would be really interesting to ask him about with this team especially. But
I'm glad you brought that question up, because it stirred something within me that I wanted to bring up as well. I was going to defer to you on the comment about, or the question about how big of a factor his father is in play calling, because you're the one that's in the locker room and the press conferences, that sort of thing. I don't know shit as far as that goes, but I do think it's interesting when you look at the way we're describing this, and I say we collectively as Titans fans, is that, oh, the offense is just going to take time to gel. But I think when you really break it down between the passing concepts in this offense and the run concepts in this offense, it's almost like learning 2 new different systems for some of these players that were here a year ago. These are very different schematically built systems than what a lot of these guys that were here last year were used to. And even the guys that weren't here last year were somewhere else last year, like Calvin Ridley in Jacksonville. And I know there's some familiarity with Nick Holtz, but this is like trying to install 2 new offenses from where I'm looking at it. Is like, this is a new run game and this is a new passing game as well. And I there is a part of me that wonders how the work is being divvied up and how much of this is just information overload with just layers upon layers of completely new information for a lot of these guys to take in and then to put into practice in a season where there's 1 less preseason game. People aren't practicing as much as they used to. Like, this could just take a lot longer, but I am curious to know what the involvement of Bill Callahan is in the play calling.
I think especially in the run game, I think that's where you probably saw a lot of Bill Callahan on Monday night. But
yeah, for sure.
When they get behind like that, I think a lot of that goes out of the door. I don't know exactly how much he listens to him. I'm sure he asked for his advice, but I don't think it's a situation where his dad is trying to tell him to do something and making him do it. I don't think that's the working relationship there. I think if he has a question or needs someone to lean on, he's going to ask for his advice. But I do still think Brian Callahan, at the end of the day, makes the final call there as the head coach.
I know, like, from just watching a lot of NFL films and shit like that, there is a dynamic between a lot of head coaches where it's like, hey, we in this down and distance, like, we need to run the ball here. Give me your best run for this look, kind of deal. And maybe that's somewhat of what the dynamic is. That's just a guess from other situations that that occur in the NFL, but I don't know. Just spitballing here.
I do wonder in terms of who designating who's in the game in terms of Tyjae Spears and Tony Pollard, who makes that call.
Yeah,
I do wonder about that, considering that the usage of that 1-2 punch that we thought it could be has been weird to me. I don't know. I just think that they can continue to still use Tyjae Spears more and effectively. I think what we've seen from him has been pretty lackluster in this game, especially when you look at what he can do in the receiving part of the game. I would personally like to see some more Tyjae Spears on a couple of those first drives as maybe check down options for Levis to keep a drive alive and going instead of having Tony Pollard out there. I do wonder who makes that comment, or who makes the final say there. I think that's something that would be really interesting to find out. But at the end of the day, I do think it is still Brian Callahan making the play calls there, and he needs to continue to be better at that and more consistent. So I think that's that on the head coach there. Now we can move to what is probably the easiest grade to give out, the Titans defense, who through 4 games here ranks first overall in defense, first in passing defense. This is kind of what we thought they would be in, and I think I've been very impressed with this group so far this season. Stoney, what are your thoughts on the defense?
Man, I'm kind of conflicted because I think we have seen, specifically in the Green Bay game, a situation where Denard Wilson, as defensive coordinator, didn't have a counterpunch, and I think that kind of skews the evaluation. We're just looking at the defense as a whole, including the coordinator. I think it might be a little different than grading the defense individually on talent, that sort of thing. I think you have people like T'Vondre Sweat that are pulling this up. I think Ernest Jones pulling this up. Kenneth Murray has been pretty good. Quandre Diggs has been pretty good. Amani Hooker has been quietly good. I think you have talent across this defense, and I think it's been a matter of execution and adjustment. And that's the only question that I really have. I don't know what the game plan was against Green Bay, but it didn't work. There was a counter to that in the Miami game. They played a little bit different stylistically from what we had seen in the first 3 games, and it worked pretty well. I think that one little question in the back of my head is just, how easy it was for Green Bay to kind of muck this defense up, and just the interior pressure didn't really matter. So, like, they designed plays to get the ball out quickly to negate the blitz, and they were beating coverage. It just kind of looked like one little thing was bringing down the whole house of cards. And that concerns me. But I still think that when these guys just get out there and run around and do their thing, I think it's a great unit. I think there's a lot of talent on this defense. So I still think it's probably around a top 10 unit in the league. I'm going to give them a B, I think.
Yeah, I think I was around the B+, A- range for them. I think you do bring up a good point about how easily they were able to kind of be taken advantage of in that Green Bay game specifically. But I think I look at it, as an A- because that's kind of the intention I had for this defense going into the season. They really have been what I thought they could be in terms of, like, the players. No one has really surprised me or done anything below my expectations. Like, Kenneth Murray has played good, but we still know that he has
Yeah.
the limitation in coverage. And that's something we knew coming into the season and just kind of had to accept there. Ernest Jones, I think, has been maybe the most impactful player, even though T'Vondre Sweat is having himself a good start to his career. But Ernest Jones has been kind of a lifesaver for this defense, acquiring him before the season. Obviously, if they had Jack Gibbons starting and playing those types of snaps, I don't know if this defense would be as good as it's been. And then you look at the guys up front, like Harold Landry, who continues to produce in the sack department, and Arden Key was Arden Key. I don't think we expected a lot out of him, and that's what we've gotten, kind of a lot of nothing out of that. And so the defense is right now where I think it is. Could they be better? Yes, I think, and a lot of that I think falls on Denard Wilson setting them up for success. But they've been who I thought they would be, and I think that's a good sign for the Titans, because as much as the struggles have been on offense, this Titans defense is going to continue to keep them in these games and continue to give them a chance to pick up some wins the rest of the season.
Yeah, and to their credit, I don't think they adjusted within the Green Bay game, but I think they probably knew that Miami was going to try to attack their defense in similar fashion to Green Bay did, because that's what Miami was doing. That wasn't a matchup thing. That's how they want to run the ball, is to get it out to the edges, get their players in space where they can capitalize on the speed that they have on offense. And I think that Denard Wilson and the Titans defense did a masterful job of adjusting to that and sending fewer people after the quarterback. Well, I mean, you didn't have to when T'Vondre Sweat was just eating dudes like Pac-Man out there, but they were dropping more guys into coverage. The safeties played really well at the edges, coming down, playing the flat, not letting the run get going. And I thought it was a masterful job of adjusting to what you expected the offense to attack. They were ready for that Dolphins offense on Monday night, and I do think that is a testament to Denard Wilson and the defense as a whole to adjust from week to week, to do what they got to do to win the matchups. And I do think that's something that when you think about, oh yeah, but they've still got this defense that's built so that if you can just like gum up the interior pressure and don't let T'Vondre Sweat get going, you can kind of effectively shut the rest of the defense down. Even though that's out there, now we have proof that Denard Wilson's willing to adjust and maybe they can beat you in a different way. So that's what has me, even though I see that, like, well, here's how you beat the defense, you still give them the props for saying, no, we've got another trick up our sleeve here.
Yeah, I agree. So that is the Titans report cards, half a quarter of the way through the season here. Or I guess 5 games through the season, technically not a quarter, I guess. But
what do we give ourselves as a podcast? 4 games into the season. Maybe we can let the comments.
Yeah, maybe the comments need to tell us. I think we do a pretty good job. I'd give us a B+, probably. I don't know. There's always room for improvement, right? You can always get better.
I say, watch out, Joe Rogan. This is the best podcast on the internet, the entire internet right now.
I think so. You know, and that it make segue us into our next conversation here, where DeAndre Hopkins is back on his cryptic tweeting, as wide receivers do. Yesterday, he tweeted out, "Patience is wisdom." And I think it can be taken a lot of different ways. Could it be him cryptically tweeting that he's got to be patient until he is potentially traded at the deadline? Is he talking about the Titans team as a whole? Is he talking about something other than football? That is, you know, the mind of a wide receiver is very interesting. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because I think it's silly to talk about DeAndre Hopkins possibly getting traded. But I know, Stoney, for a fact that you are a man of poetry and you dabble in words and their meanings. What is your take on the wide receiver once again cryptically tweeting?
I think, man, I don't know about this one. I think patience is wisdom, like words to live by. You know, that's like, you don't have to. Coming from a football player is what makes that noteworthy. Otherwise, like that is something to consider. That is something to go through life remembering. Patience is wisdom. Now, I don't know. Maybe it is just maybe he's sympathetic towards his quarterback, towards his head coach, this offense getting rolling. Like, hey, we don't need to blow things up right now. Let's just be patient with this, and we'll get to where we're going. I don't know. I would say at least he's not tweeting pictures of Edgar Allan Poe like Devontae Adams is, which, if you don't know, The Raven, written by Edgar Allan Poe, Baltimore connection, all that stuff. Like, the internet's going wild with that right now. I honestly would not have even noticed this story if people didn't retweet it. Like, it's just, I don't think it's that big of a deal. It's typical wide receiver, the enemy moves swift at night with a knife kind of ass tweets.
Yeah, no, I agree there with you. And I think, as Jack Ripper brings up in the comments, DHop said he was happy with as happy with an organization ever. Obviously, that was
seems to like Nashville.
That was during training camp, where the Titans weren't losing games all the time, but and things can always change. But I do think that, you know, it could, honestly, it could be about, I don't know, maybe a business venture of his or something. Who knows? But I think it'd be pretty silly. Considering, I think right now, with where this team is, I think it would be pretty silly if we come to the trade deadline and DeAndre Hopkins is traded, because of what he brings, what he brings in terms of the safety and security for Will Levis. And if you want to see Will Levis, what he can be at his fullest, you need a guy like DeAndre Hopkins around for this team.
Yeah, if you're going to trade DeAndre Hopkins at this point, just start Mason Rudolph.
Yeah. But I don't think this team is going to want to tank. I think they want to be as competitive as ever. And as Daniel in the comments, he's back. No anger today. No seppuku. Saying tighten up. So I'm glad that people are, feeling the good vibes of a non-Titans football weekend, maybe.
Dude,
so
do you know how much this week would have been hell if the Titans had lost that game on Monday night? Like, let's take our moment in the sun here and just enjoy the victory. I get it. I'm with you guys.
Yeah, victories are nice, but trying to find your future answer at quarterback so you can have many victories, I think, is also nice.
Well, I'm doing that by watching Jalen Milroe tape this weekend.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I think, without the Titans playing football this week, that gives us a perfect segue into our best bets for week 5 here. Just like Will Levis and his baby steps of progress, myself, I don't know about you, Stoney, but I'm making baby steps of progress back into the win column here, going 2-2-1 last week. It's not as atrocious as the 1-4 starts I have continued to have to start this season. But hey, you know what? It's a long season. That's why we call it the gauntlet, because you have to run the gauntlet. It's a marathon, not a sprint. And we're back with our bets this week. I will kick off our best bet slate, taking the Carolina Panthers, taking them +4 against the Chicago Bears. Listen, it can't be overstated what Andy Dalton has done for this team. The Panthers have scored 24+ points in consecutive games under Dalton. They've done that one other time since 2021. He has revitalized this offense, and I think they're going up in a matchup here where I really am just not impressed with this Bears team. I think they have a really solid defense, but outside of that, I think, the offense still looks questionable. What Caleb Williams is. He has not set the world on fire like many have expected him to. And I think this is a sneaky good Panthers team that's playing pretty good ball right now. Even though they lose last week to the Bengals, they were in that game until the end. And so I think this is a bounce back spot here for the Carolina Panthers, going up against a team like the Chicago Bears here, who are coming off a gross, ugly win over the LA Rams, who are not much better than them. I think that one just got away with them because of all the injuries they have. But I like Andy Dalton as an underdog this week, going up against the young gun and Caleb Williams. So give me the Panthers +4.
Some of us, by the way, JT, did say, hey, I don't know if this quarterback class is going to be as good as everybody makes it out to be. And it's probably going to take some time for a lot of these guys. Caleb Williams, chief among them. Drake May and Michael Penix Jr. aren't even playing right now. Jaden Daniels is a rookie sensation. And then Bo Nix is at the helm of the sicko team of the season so far in the Denver Broncos. So I'm not actually victory lapping, but I just want you guys to know I'm thinking about victory lapping on the quarterback class right now. I am going to go, speaking of rookie quarterbacks, Minnesota has one that they're not even playing because he's hurt right now. That was a terrible segue. I need to work on that. That was ass. I'm going to go with the Vikings nonetheless. 2.5-point favorites hosting the New York Jets. I think that Jets offense has looked a little clunky this season. They haven't quite gotten it right there in New York. And I don't know if it's just because I keep reading Cody Alexander's Match Quarters newsletter every week where he's breaking down defensive football, but it's like every week there's an article about what Brian Flores is doing on the defensive side of the ball right now and is just leading a revolution among defense. And it's so hard to game plan for this. And they're beating people up, man. I love this Vikings team. I think, oh God, I was about to say something completely unhinged. I might get me kicked off this network if I say it, but now I have to, so I'm gonna.
Okay.
I think Sam Darnold might be the MVP of the league so far.
Wow.
Nonetheless,
Wow.
I am taking the Vikings 2.5-point favorites against the wonky New York Jets offense because of that matchup.
Yeah, riding the hot hand. They're 4-0, 4-0 against the spread as well. So that's a team that is clicking on all cylinders, especially when you bet them against the spread there. I do like that pick and continuing to ride Sam Darnold in his revenge match against the New York Jets this week. With my second pick this week, speaking of quarterbacks in a class that might not be good, I'm backing Bo Nix this week, -3. Against the Las Vegas Raiders. Listen, what the Raiders have going on right now, I think that locker room is a mess. I think Antonio Pierce is a good coach, but obviously it seems like there's trouble in paradise early there for this team. No Devontae Adams, Max Crosby, once again questionable for this game this week, and they're playing a Denver Broncos team where Sean Payton and this Broncos defense. This Broncos defense is absolutely legit. They rank 4th in defense EPA per play. They also have the 3rd highest blitz rate and 2nd highest man coverage rate. I think this team is going to be able to lock up the receivers they throw out there. This is a play against Gardner Minshew, and I think Gardner Minshew, we haven't seen the worst of him yet, and I think that's coming, especially this week against a Denver Broncos team who's riding an ugly win. I think they're going to continue to run that with that momentum there, and I'm going to back Bo Nix in this team to get a divisional win here, -3.
Side note, I am 3-1 in my fantasy league with Bo Nix as my QB1. It's a dynasty league. And I phased out of Ryan Tannehill and Russell Wilson as my 2 starting quarterbacks for the last 3 seasons. That phased out real quick. And I've won the league 2 years in a row. So my draft pick was super late. Jaden Daniels and Caleb Williams were both gone. So I was like, you know what?
You just said Bo Nix.
I'm going to go with Bo Nix. And now I'm 3-1. I love watching this Broncos team. It is absolutely the shittiest football in the NFL right now, but it is so, I don't know. There's something about it that's just endearing. It's like watching a MAC game on Tuesday night between Northern Illinois and Central Michigan or something like that. I love watching these Denver Broncos. I'm going to go with the Green Bay Packers 3-point favorites at Los Angeles Rams. I think the Rams are a hot mess right now. I don't think they have the talent to really hang with the Packers on either side of the ball. I think this is going to be a relatively easy win for Green Bay, regardless of whether or not Jordan Love is back up to full health or not.
Yeah, I think you're right. This is a reeling Rams team who still is without a lot of their key pieces, and this is a Packers team that I think they're going to want to get right and bounce back from an ugly loss to the Minnesota Vikings last week. For my third pick here in the Best Bet Gauntlet for Week 5, I am taking the New Orleans Saints, 5.5-point underdogs against the Kansas City Chiefs. Nothing really else to say besides this is the exact spot to fade Patrick Mahomes. He is 38-44-2 against the spread as a favorite of more than a field goal, which is good for 46%. He's 76% against the spread as a field goal favorite or under. I think this is a Saints team that has surprised a lot of people, and they're playing really good ball so far this season. I think they're going to be able to run on this Chiefs defense, and especially without Rashee Rice, the Kansas City Chiefs offense continues to be hampered without a lot of skill position players making big impacts. And so I think, especially over that field goal as an underdog against the Chiefs, you have to play it and fade Mahomes because the trends tell you to. So I'm going to take New Orleans plus 5.5.
I'm going to stick with Saints at Chiefs for my next pick, but I'm going to take the over. That point total is currently sitting at 43.5. I think there's a lot of speed on the field in this game, and it's prime time. We're starting to see, as we enter week 5 of the NFL season, a lot of these offenses are starting to come along a little bit. We're starting to see the scoring inch up a little bit week by week, and I think this is going to end up being a pretty fun game I think this has surprising shootout potential to me. So I'm going to take the over in this spot.
With my fourth pick this week, I'm going with the Buffalo Bills. I feel like I've been on the pulse of the Bills pretty well so far this season, with aiding them last week that Baltimore just absolutely manhandles them in. But this week they go up against a Texans team in what will be a Stephon Diggs revenge game for them. They started off the week as favorites. Now they are 1-point underdogs, and I'm going to take them there right now. And this is simply just a matchup fading the Houston Texans and what they're doing right now. CJ Stroud has faced 3 opponents in his NFL career who are averaging 24 points per game or more on the season. Entering the matchup, the Texans are 1-2 straight up and 0-3 against the spread in those games. They've been outscored 81-36 in that spot. You just look at what Josh Allen has been able to do this year as well, second in EPA and CPOE this season. And they're going up against a Texans team, which is outside the top 10 in pass defense, DVOA, EPA, and success rate. I think this is a spot where the Bills look to bounce back here and get a statement win, especially as underdogs. I like Josh Allen in this spot, so give me the Bills +1.
JT, do you know what your record is just betting on Bills games this season? Because that's what we should be advertising for the best bet.
I think I've gotten them all. I think I'm 3-0 betting all them this year. So
that's awesome. That's the nugget within the nugget you have to look for in the best bet gauntlet. I'm going to go to this disgusting New York Giants at Seattle Seahawks game. I think this is going to be another fun one. That point total is sitting at 42.5 right now. I think Geno Smith is just slinging it right now, the most accurate quarterback in the league. I think the Giants have surprised on offense at times. And I know the Seahawks defense has been a little banged up in recent weeks. So I think this is one that you could play it a couple of ways. I think this could be a pretty fun, surprising shootout, or I think Seattle could hit the over on their own. So I'm going to take the over 42.5 regardless.
Yeah, I like that pick. My last pick here in the best bet gauntlet, I'm taking the Arizona Cardinals +7.5 against the San Francisco 49ers. Murray is 26-16-2 against the spread as an underdog in his career, and underdogs in this spot have been very, very profitable so far this season. NFL underdogs of 6 or more points this season are 9-8 straight up and 14-2-1 against the spread. This is a team, I think they've been those teams that are over 6-point underdogs have covered the spread by 7.3 points on average. This is also another system spot where teams to lose by 17 plus points versus a team who won by 17 plus points the previous week, 113-77 against the spread in the last 20 years. I like what this Arizona Cardinals team, I think they're better than their loss against Jaden Daniels last week. And this is a team where I think they're going to probably get the best of, what a maybe uninspired San Francisco team. They've been playing good football, but it hasn't looked the same as it has in recent years. And so I'm going to take the Cardinals to cover it by the field or for the touchdown, 7.5.
I'm going to make the final and most disgusting pick of the week here. I'm going to Dolphins at Patriots. I'm seeing a point total that's at 35.5, and I think that is way too high for where these offenses are at right now. These are two. I mean, I'm about ready to say their season is over for these two teams, but specifically on offense, man, two of the worst that I've watched so far this year. I think it's going to be a struggle to find points. I think despite what we saw on Monday night, I still think the Dolphins defense is a little better than it's being given credit for. And I think the Patriots have a pretty good defense. So I think this is going to be another Jets Broncos finishes like 10-9 or something like that. I don't care. You could set that number at 20 and I'd probably still bet the under.
All right, so those are our bets this week. To recap, I am taking Carolina +4, Denver -3, New Orleans +5.5, Buffalo +1, and the Cardinals +7.5. That is one favorite for underdog. Stoney, you are taking Minnesota -2.5, Green Bay -3, the over in both the New Orleans Saints and Kansas City game and the Seahawks Giants game, and then the under in what will probably most likely be a gross game against the Miami Dolphins and New England Patriots. That's going to do it for us today on the Hot Read podcast. We'll be back next Tuesday to talk some more Titans as they get ready for their first divisional game of the season against the Indianapolis Colts. But until then, this has been the Enjoy a Titans stress-free weekend of football, and we'll catch you later.